think I recognize about 2/3 of you. So this is beginning to feel like a party at my house sort of thing going on now. So, well, thank you everybody for coming, and you should know that Hidden Kalamazoo is happening again this summer. So watch for it, especially if you're on Facebook. You can friend us on Facebook and stay up to date on everything that's happening. Maybe even have some input if you have some ideas that we haven't thought of, and some people have come up with some pretty great ideas that I hadn't thought of or none of our committee had thought of. So for those of you who were here last summer in June, just before the tour, I did a Kalamazoo Then and Now, Chapter 1, which was Michigan Avenue, Main Street, and Burdick. And so this time I said, well, you know, I really want to do some stuff about the park. And so I thought, and I looked at what photos I had, and I just scored this one really cool postcard on eBay, so I wanted to share it with everybody. So I said, okay, we're gonna do right around the park. So this is gonna be kind of a tour around the park and a little bit further on with South Academy and Rose Street. I love this. This is one of my favorite pictures that I just found. And I'm going to have to say, some of these pictures came from the Vanished Kalamazoo site. If any of you are on Vanished Kalamazoo on Facebook, it's really cool. Some of these came from eBay. I didn't actually manage to buy the image, but I stole it quick before I bid. And so at least I have the image if I couldn't afford the original one. A lot of them are from the Kalamazoo Public Library, the Archives Museum website, where so much is online. If I ever want to waste an afternoon, I just go there and start typing in terms and come up with some amazing things. And a couple of them came from a wonderful collection called The Making of Modern Michigan, which is housed at the University of Michigan. And this is kind of a collection of all sorts of photographs and documents that have been scanned from across Michigan. And anybody has access to this. It's a wonderful site. A bunch are from Kalamazoo, fairly rich in stuff from the 50s and 60s, as well as going back in time. So it's kind of a mix. I think of, my husband and I were just talking about when we started being aware of the world outside of our own home. And for me, everything since 1962 is current events. So I don't think of the 60s as historic, but they are. And so when I say, well, I guess that is a historic site now when I think about it. So let's take a tour around the park and see what we can see. The past is a foreign country. It's like traveling in a different place. There are so many things that are familiar. There are so many, many, many things that are very different from the way we see them today, the way we live today, our expectations of today. And it's not necessarily better or worse. There are some great things that happened in the past, some wonderful ways of living, some others that were very difficult and very restrictive for people. But there were also, you know, we've got some great stuff going here. I'm especially fond of antibiotics and flush toilets. So this is a view. I like this one because it shows this is the same, from almost exactly the same place. This is Michigan Avenue. There's the Peninsula building with the billboard on top of it, before the billboard was on top of it, and that's been there since 1882. And this is the same, as close as I could get to the same view without standing in traffic, today. And you can see there is no pavement. That's just dirt. There's no curbing, and there are horses. So if you can imagine a summer, wonderful, beautiful summer day, just rained, the horses were well fed this morning, that street is not going to be pleasant to walk through. So you kind of begin to understand why the idea of paving got real popular. And every so often in some of these pictures, I don't think I spotted one here, you'll see a little man with a little cart behind him that's shaped like a garbage can in a white outfit, and he was cleaning up the street for everybody. So this is a job that's gone away now. There's not a lot of views of stuff on Academy Street. This one I thought was especially dramatic because this is Pellick Stevens, who owned and who built the building that's now the Studio Grill. Okay, so those of you who are on the tour, Studio Grill, you went upstairs, saw the old photo studio. The gentleman who built that, this was after the fire at his house in 1868. Okay, it just tore everything apart. So this is Michigan Avenue. And so back here, what we're seeing, now that it's been cleared for us, is Academy Street. So you see these houses that are back there, all these different houses that are there. I believe, no, that's not, that might be still there. That one might still be there. And see this little thing here with that little cupola on top, that's the Union School. It stood in its time on Vine Street, roughly between where Old Central is and where the Vine Elementary, the El Sol School, is today. And that was the first school in Kalamazoo not the first, but that was the first union school where everybody went to that school. This is a little house on Academy Street, probably in that same block. It's not up here, or at least we can't see it. I suspect that one of these two might actually be this house, but I can't say for sure. So this is it. And the fences, everybody had fences because one of the things that pigs did, besides providing pork and everything else, and piglets, was they helped also to clean up the streets. And you did not want them in your yard. And so in the areas downtown where sometimes pigs roamed and cleaned up after the horses, then you would have fences to keep things out. To keep your pets in maybe, but more to keep other animals out. So you see a lot more fences in the mid and late 19th century than you're going to see later when we no longer had that as an issue that needed to be taken care of and needed to be addressed. So this is that picture. This is the same view. This is I'm guessing this is right around 1885 because of the fact that there's an electric light fixture here. There's some electric lines running, I think kind of perhaps hazardously, over the fountain. And then here you see this is a wooden sidewalk, a wooden plank walk. These are probably just dirt paths. I'm pretty sure, pounded dirt. I don't think they're actually paved. There was a short time in the late 1870s where they tried putting concrete down, and because concrete came to Kalamazoo in 1878, and they put concrete in a diamond pattern, black and white diamond pattern, on one part of Bronson Park. I'm pretty sure it was on the South Street side, and I know this from an old article I read about concrete, but if you want to see what that looked like, go to the Portrait Ladies Library and look. That is paved with a black and white diamond pattern concrete. And concrete was a new material, even though the Romans had discovered it many, many hundreds and thousands of years ago. Nonetheless, getting it in Kalamazoo where we had the lime and the other things we needed to make it didn't happen until 1878. So this is kind of fun. So this is that same view today. You can see that the configuration of the sidewalks is very, very different from the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s than it is today. When Iannelli designed the fountain in 1939, he changed the layout completely. This is St. John's Place, which is that little road that goes between City Hall and the Presbyterian Church. Okay, and you can see that how neatly those trees are just lined up, just like a little fence row right there along the side of St. John's Place. I just love these guys with the kids and the little stroller and the little dog. And the sign, it's kind of hard to read here, but it does say keep off the grass. It's like what? Excuse me, keep off the grass? What is the park for? But anyway, this is the same view today. This is Academy Street. Again, here we have mostly houses. This is the block that is now between, it's the same picture I have here, between the First Methodist Church and Westnedge. This was all residential back then. In fact, you can't really see it here, but there's a wonderful big brick house right about here, and this is that house from that time period. And this kind of helps you place it. The little blue and yellow stars is looking at this little onion dome tower here that's on all three of these pictures. Kind of helps you get perspective about when there might have been a new house added and what position you are in on the street. But again, now look, one of the things we have here now is we have paving, we have curbs. So that means our storm sewer system has come in, and now we have curbs and things are advancing. We are moving mightily into the late 19th century and becoming modern. This is Academy Street, where now we have First Congregational, of course, and First Reformed Church here. And then this is the original Congregational Church. Most of the churches, except First Baptist around Bronson Park, were lost to fires in the 1920s. There's never been a real investigation into exactly what caused all the fires. My personal suspicion is that something changed about how the gas was fed to the furnaces and some kind of fuel changed. And that this was the oldest area of the city, and this might have been something that just didn't go well, because losing 3 of the 4 churches around the park in like an 8-year period was really kind of surprising. So this was the old First Congregational, and this obviously this is the new First Con. So, and this is First Reformed, and this is that same entrance is there now without the little crenellations on top, but nonetheless this is that same little entrance. So that was must have been quite a bell tower there in that rose window. I'd love to see a picture of that. Of course, couldn't have a color picture of that nowadays, but certainly would have been interesting to see. Now this is again, this is a before and after. before the fire. This is what it looked like. This building down at this end was the YMCA, which was also lost to a fire in 1910 or 11, I believe. Devastating fire, completely gutted it out. So we lost a lot of buildings to fire in downtown Kalamazoo in the first couple decades of the 20th century. And of course, this is what it looks like now. And if you know the building at all, you know that now there's a connector here, and there's another building that also extends all the way to the corner here as well. So this block is pretty filled in. The four blocks that comprise 2 blocks of Bronson Park, and then the block that the county courthouse is in, and the block the churches are in, this was the plat that allowed Titus Bronson to get Kalamazoo declared the county seat, because he had a block for an academy, which would have been the west end of the park. He had a block for a village green, which would have been the east end of the park, block for the county courthouse, which is where it is today, and a block for churches. And setting aside that much land for municipal civic uses was why they said one of the reasons they chose Kalamazoo as the county seat, plus the fact that we were centrally located. So when we became a county, Kalamazoo became the county seat because we had that land set aside. And that same pattern is still there today. We still have three churches on 3 of the 4 lots that are on that corner. We still have the county building in that position. The academy is gone because they did build the academy as a branch of the University of Michigan in the 1830s, but it started getting dilapidated and it was in really rough shape and they weren't using it anymore. Nobody was doing anything about it. And so a bunch of people in the middle of the night dragged it out to the middle of the street and set it on fire. And then it was gone and it was taken care of. And shortly after that, Kalamazoo College was formed, so we still had it. This is a kind of a fun little picture. This is Mr. Nichols with his milk wagon and his 2 horses, and he's parked on the academy side of the park, just kind of showing himself off a little bit. I'm not quite able to figure out exactly where he is, but look at how young all the trees are there. They're really, so it's got to be like 1870s or so. This is a view of South Street. Okay, now this is taken from, Kalamazoo College had 2 buildings at this point in time. They had one building here, okay, which is this building. And then this building that you see off in the distance on the hilltop, that's where this picture is taken from, probably from the cupola on top. So this picture is taken straight up South Street. So this, right now, so this would be Oakland Drive, this would be South Street, and the back this way a little bit that's where Lovell is, and then there's that little ugly convenience store there, okay? And then this is all the green space that we think of now that's like just a median, really, where that the new columns and everything are down at that end, the peristyle at the west end, southwest end. And then this is the train tracks, the Michigan Central tracks, so those have not changed position, so if that kind of helps you place it in your head. And this is what was called Mirror Lake. Mirror Lake was a very glassy body of water located below the hill, below Kalamazoo College. And there's I don't think I put one of the pictures in, I did not. But I've got a couple of pictures where you literally can see the hillside and the college reflected in the lake. That's how it was, very smooth. It was part of Arcadia Creek. Arcadia Creek was never a fast flowing creek, and so when it was very still, it'd be very, very still. So this is, and then here, I want to go back here. This is, here, there's the college, and so right along South Street here, this is a wood sidewalk, and this is a fence. So the fence is on both sides, and this is a wooden plank sidewalk. Corner of Academy and, South Street and Westnedge. This is where the Upjohn Institute for Employment Research is today, up here. I don't know if any of you remember that wonderful old house, do you? Yeah, you probably walk past it on the way to school occasionally. Yep, wonderful, wonderful house. The houses on this corner pretty much turned into businesses and went away from being residential fairly quickly once we hit the 20th, middle of the 20th century, because commerce was moving elsewhere. It was moving out further out to the neighborhoods. It was concentrating in the downtown. And then, as this was part on the edge of downtown, this became part of the commercial area of the city. The one across the street was, back when this was taken, was an antique shop, but I remember it as a bridal shop when I was a kid. And of course, this is what it looks like today. It's been very nicely restored. John Stryker did the restoration. And the current folks that own it are putting an addition on the rear.
When they took down the style shop, wasn't that when the big movement came to preserve some of these old things?
That was part of it, yeah. I was wanting to say, let's keep our stuff going, yeah. Yeah, that and Peter Schmidt showing up at Western, he had a lot to do with getting us interested in preservation. The Marlboro, of course, really very, very minimal changes from the past. This is what it looked like in like 1927 when it was completed. You can see the little cars out front. Not much of a difference today. It's still got the same little balconies. Now inside, this was a huge collection of apartments of all sorts of sizes, way down to about maybe 400 square feet, where you'd have your bed would fold out of the wall in the living room. There was even a shared cafeteria, dining room in the basement. So if you were a working gal or a single man and you didn't want to have to worry about cooking, you could just go downstairs and you could, if you rented one of the apartments, you could have food service as well. So it was kind of like a boarding house, a little bit fancier than your average everyday boarding house. And it became condominiums in the early 1980s. So it's all the different units are owned by the people who live there now. And some of them are still very, very tiny, but most of them are one apartment, if not two full apartments, to make it into the kind of space people expect today.
And they have businesses.
And they have businesses in the basement. The Athena bookshop was down there for a long time.
They had Aunt Katie's clothes too.
Mm-hmm. So this is where the KIA is today. This was the same building used for two different purposes. Now you can tell that the American Legion came first. First of all, you can see that wonderful pile of cannonballs out front. That's subtle. But then here, when the Institute of Art took over, they apparently took down this cute little peak here because you can see the chimney behind it now. Okay, so they removed that possibly because it had become deteriorated. And then, of course, when they built the original part of the Kalamazoo Institute of Arts, they took the entire house down. But temporarily, this was the house that the Institute of Arts was in. And later on, when we're looking at Rose Street, you'll see the house that they were in that preceded this. Civic Theater, of course, was built in the early 1920s, partly because Mr. Upjohn did not want his daughter to go away to New York City and become an actress. He wanted her to stay in town, so he helped form an acting company, the Civic Theater. He endowed them. They started out at the Lincoln School in that wonderful auditorium there, and then this building went up. And so Dorothy never left town, but she got her chance to perform. I'll go back. This is the Civic. They're doing Peter Pan next. If any of you still have a little bit of child in you want to go see that one. That's always a fun show to do. And here's First Presbyterian and, of course, City Hall. So we know this dates probably after the Second World War. But you can see First Pres has these two pieces are kind of disconnected. And the new addition, which does not show up in my photograph, is absolutely wonderful. It's one of the most complex elevators in the entire city because it goes up half a level and then it has 3 doors in the elevator car to open to different places it needs to open to in order to go up and down. So here's First Presbyterian. Now, First Presbyterian was originally located about a block further into the downtown at the corner of Rose and South Street. This was one of the buildings that burned, one of the churches that burned. So they built this new one in the late 1920s, early 1930s. Absolutely gorgeous. Probably one of the prettiest rose windows we have in any church in Kalamazoo. This is the picture I took this morning, and you can see here, these were separated at that time, and now everything is connected together. It's really quite a large complex and a wonderful, wonderful site downtown. This is a very handsome building. I just love the cars, too, getting glimpses of the old. And these were built, anybody correct me, what I was told by my mom was they built these little rails for the ramps that went down into the street for the disabled veterans that came back after World War II. Okay, so I got it right. Okay, good. So this idea of ramping down to the street is way older than our current round. And I think there's maybe 2 or 3 of the actual handrails still left that I've seen in the city, and none left in the downtown. So, of course, our City Hall, our wonderful City Hall, was built for cash. The city did not go into debt to build this in the late 1920s. They paid for everything up front. This was the way it looked at the end of the Second World War for the Welcome Home Veterans celebration. And this is the way it looks today. It really hasn't changed. It's a wonderful space. I'm sure all of you have been inside there, but if you ever get a chance to go in the evening when they have the lights in the lobby down a little bit, and they've got these wonderful lamps in the atrium that are golden and just light up at night, very similar in design to these pillar lamps here. only inside. And it's just a really beautiful, beautiful space at night. And then this is, I love this view. I could not find a picture of this house, unfortunately, from the front, but this is the Park Club. And this is the site, of course, where City Hall is today. So this is about the same view, as far as I could get, as close as I could get, but for the Park Club for today. And this is the way it used to be. Now, the Park Club was many different things. It was, of course, originally a home. And then later it became the Borough Club Cafe, run by the Oddfellows, as you can see, for Oddfellows and their friends. Oddfellows, like Elks and like many other fraternal organizations, the reason they existed was in the days before everybody had insurance, life insurance. You were a member of an Oddfellow, you paid your dues, you kept your money up, and then if something happened to you, the rest of your fellow Elks or Moose or Oddfellows would take care of your family. So it was kind of like an insurance plan. I was just finished a book about the Cherry Mine disaster down in Indiana, and like over 200 miners were killed, but they had a really strong Oddfellows and other fraternal organizations in town, and Oddfellows from all over the country and the different fraternal groups sent money to those families to help them get along, to maybe send them back to the old country, to send them to live with family, because if you have a widow with 4 kids, what's she going to do in a mining town, you know, when you've lost almost half the miners in a mining fire? So the Oddfellows and that sort of organization, that's what they did. It was fraternal, but it also had a very, very important day-to-day purpose in keeping people, you know, safe and taken care of. And this, of course, is that building today. And I love the fact that they put such a nice, tasteful elevator on the outside here. I mean, it's not in this picture you can see, but that's the actual elevator, and I think it blends in very nicely. It makes that wonderful third-floor ballroom accessible. This is West South Street, 1952. I just love the cars all lined up, going what we now would think of as the wrong way. Okay, but this is the same view. Here's City Hall here, and here it is here. This the same space, very, very different. Still pretty much the same uses. Really, the only difference down here, the biggest difference, is the fact that traffic goes another way. It's still Bronson Park. It's still the Park Club. It's still the wonderful Presbyterian Church. So I'm not moving through time this time. I'm kind of going by position, and I'll have the oldest. These are the oldest pictures I could find. Now this is, I couldn't quite get the same angles here, but see this house here? That's this house, and that's in what was now be the parking lot of the Park Club. That was the house that was on the corner there, across from the wonderful old glorious library that we had. So this was the postcard that I said, oh, I've got to share that with people because that's just very cool. And look how tranquil and residential this street is. This street is 100% residential at this point. 2 sides of the park are residential. No, 3 sides of the park are residential, and then there's churches on the north side and 2 churches on the west side. The rest of it is all, and the courthouse. The rest of it's residential. It's like the place to be downtown, is right around that park. That is the upscale neighborhood, the place to live. And then, of course, the library. Now, how many of you actually remember the library? Yes, okay. Do you remember the way it smelled? Smelled like a library. I remember going in that, but let me see, I think I went down there maybe only 2 or 3 times when I was a kid, because they tore it down in 1959. And like the City Hall up in Grand Rapids that was the same style, Richardsonian Romanesque, actually all stone. It's not steel reinforced anything. That's all a true stone structure. Tearing it down bankrupted the company that was hired to demolish it, as it did in Grand Rapids. They bankrupted the company that tore down that City Hall. So this is the library we have today. Oh, this is the library we have today. And then this is what it used to look like. Just a beautiful, beautiful building. And then, of course, this is the building that replaced it in the late 1950s. We all remember that. That building, of course, is still, for those of you who know, this inside here, this building, okay? Except for all the panels are gone and the tile is gone. But pretty much a lot of it. But this structure was designed from the beginning to take a 3rd floor. When they put the footings in for this building, they said, we may want to expand this someday. We're going to make sure that it can take a 3rd floor from the outset. So where we are right now was part of the plan in 1959. It just wasn't put into fruition until the library was reconfigured. So we're going a little bit further up South Street. And here we see the south side of the Presbyterian Church. This is the Park building that was torn down for this building. the brown building, the old post office, and behind here is the north side of the library. And we've got curbs. You can see the streetcar lines we've got going here. We've got still mostly horse and buggy. This is probably right around 1904, 1905. So there might have been a couple motor cars in town at this point in time, but they were owned by wealthy people who were perhaps risk takers. This is part of the Upjohn Company, which was doing most of its manufacturing at that point in the downtown. Pretty much the same position where the old world headquarters was. That was where some of the buildings, or is, that's where a lot of the buildings were in that block behind there. So this is that same view looking up that street today. So the Upjohn Company building is still there in the distance, although I believe that's going to be the new medical school building, and there it is still in the distance. This is the Kalamazoo Telegraph building. This was the Park building. When you last saw it, it was white. It hasn't been brick like this. And it had several names. It was the Telegraph was the alternate newspaper in Kalamazoo. It was another newspaper. And so the presses were actually in that building. And it was also the Pythian building when it was owned by the Knights of Pythias, another fraternal organization. And they had their meeting hall was, I believe, on the top floor. So they've got a lot of different uses of things going on in the downtown. Now this is one of my favorite pictures. This is South Street right here. And this is where the JCPenney is today. This is very, very, very different than what you think of today. And of course, this is that as well. The post office, this came first. The post office came in the late 1890s, and then we have the JCPenney building came in the mid-1950s. Now, of course, it's something else altogether. It's going to be, well, the Gazette's downstairs, and it's all going to be apartments and such upstairs. Downtown Kalamazoo, our residential vacancy rate is less than 2%. It's hard to get a place downtown Kalamazoo, which I think is really great. This is the Brown building. Oh, go back. This is the Brown building. This is what it is today. This is that same building. Now, you'll notice the awnings. And there's no building that you will see anywhere in Kalamazoo, anywhere really, pretty much in the world, where, or at least in the northern hemisphere, where you have awnings on the north side of a building except at ground level. Because the north side never got direct sun, so you didn't need an awning. You have it at ground level because to keep the rain off of your customers when they're going in and out of your building. But you won't have it on the upper levels because the awnings were the air conditioning of their day. That's how you cooled off inside. You'd have the awning to shade your window from the heat of the outside sun. This pre-air conditioning, even pre-electricity, an awning was about the best thing you could do to cool off your house a little bit or keep your building a little bit cooler. And these big stone buildings, these big masonry buildings, they really hold a lot of heat. So not letting it get in the first place is your best choice. And of course, in the by the 30s and 40s, it was the Walgreens. And again, still mostly offices up here. Most of the time, these offices were real estate agents, insurance agents, doctors, dentists, all sorts of businesses had their offices in these buildings. Doctors didn't start having offices in their homes or in individual clinics until after the Second World War, by and large. This is when they were building the post office. So you can see the piles of bricks they had all piled up there. And there's the old First Methodist Church back in the background there. So the library is off. Nope, it hasn't even been constructed yet. 1891, the library wasn't until 1893, I think. So the library doesn't even exist yet there. But these are houses, and this is a church here. And then the new post office is going right downtown at the corner of South Street and Burdick. What a cool building. See, this shows you the library and the post office. Again, you've got your awnings. There could be awnings on the south or on the north side if it was just decorative, but there aren't. They're just on the east side. Now this is that same view looking, now we're looking west up South Street. This is the first one of the places you're going to see a lot of street trees. That's a way you can tell instantly whether the photo you have is a residential or a commercial area. People did not plant street trees in the late 19th and well into the 20th century in places where there were commercial area, when there were businesses and shops. Because if you had trees in front of your shops, even though they provided a little bit of shade, no one could see your signs. And with businesses changing as much as they did, same way they do today, about every 2 to 5 years you'd get a new business in. Places like the Coney Island are really unusual because they've been there for almost 90 years. You know, but if you changed a lot, you wanted people to see your sign, so you did not have street trees. So this is a really big cultural change we've made in the last 30 years, the idea of having street trees. So you know that this end, down here, suddenly this becomes the park, and this is all residential after this block, because there's the library, so we're talking about this being Rose Street right here. And at that point, it's residential, heading west, all residential. This was kind of fun, especially the ad. I thought that was especially charming. This is where the Goodale Funeral Parlor was, 119 East South Street, which is this vacant lot right now. Thousands of graves are robbed annually. We take pleasure in announcing to the public that we have now, just like, that's really, let's frighten everybody. And you could buy, of course, coffins with little bells on and a string inside, just in case you'd been buried prematurely. And every so often that there's, I'm not going to go into that because that's another whole topic. Okay, but you do know that in the winter, a lot of times you didn't bury folks in the winter. You had, that's what the receiving vault was for, because you couldn't get into the frozen ground. And so you'd have a receiving vault, which is what that wonderful little building in Mountain Home Cemetery is. That's where you would stay until the ground thawed enough, and then the people would be buried. So this, although I don't think that's the receiving vault they're talking about, I think that's really just kind of frightening. And now keep in mind too that the reason, you see this is an early ambulance as well as being for the funeral parlor, because the same way that back in the 40s, 50s and stuff, if you remember you either had that a lot of funeral parlors ran the ambulance services because they had the big station wagons or the wagons that could carry a person lying down. Okay, now in the case of the funeral parlor, it was to take the coffin, but in the case of the ambulance, the same sort of thing. Let's get you to the hospital quickly. And so you had something where you could actually lay down. So not unusual for a funeral parlor to have as its side business an ambulance. Kind of odd, but you know, I mean, it seems kind of creepy to us today, but that made a lot of sense back in that day. Okay, so East South Street, for those of us who remember the Capitol or the Majestic, if you really go back in time, this is what this area looked like. This is the brown building that had that I talked about the awnings. This was the Elks Lodge, I believe, and then we had the Majestic, which later became the Capitol Theater. And that's what, this is pretty much that site today. I may be off by a few feet, but I think I'm pretty darn close. It's kind of hard to tell. And then, of course, there's the Capitol. We all remember, well, many of us remember the Capitol Theater. And for those of you who do remember the Capitol, do you remember the blue clock? The lower right to the right of the screen, it was a blue neon clock right over the exit door. They would never do that today. Well, you don't want to know when the movie's going to be over, then you might leave early. You know, it's like, no, sorry. They don't do that today. But I love this picture of the Capitol because that's the Capitol Theater I remember. And then across the street, for those of you on vanished Kalamazoo, there are people going on and on about, oh, we go to the Cupie, we go to the Capitol, we go to the Cupie for a hamburger afterwards. That's where Dave Thomas went before he started Wendy's. He lived here in Kalamazoo. And this was one of the restaurants that inspired him to make his hamburgers. And this is the one that was here in Kalamazoo. So that's it. My dad even talks about that. He says one of his second dates with my mom was at the Cupies. So now this was, as you can see, this is next to the Capitol, okay? This was the B'nai Israel Synagogue, later subsumed inside a business building, as you can see here. And that would be about where this part of the parking ramp is today. Just kind of encapsulated within it. But this was a wonderful, wonderful building. And then there, beyond the synagogue, beyond the temple, there's a couple more buildings there, and this is what those were. These were apartment buildings. This one is the one that was right next to the synagogue. You can see the sloped roof from behind. So this one was right next to the synagogue, and this one was one over, because here you see the Upjohn World Headquarter building right now that's on Henrietta. Now it's called John Street. It used to be on Henrietta Street. And so this is right on the corner of Henrietta, John Street, and East South. This was an apartment building. We had a lot more apartment buildings back in the day than we have of this old type. I mean, these are long since gone. Still got maybe half a dozen in town, but you know, there aren't a lot of them left. But they were a lot more back then. Now this is, if we remember, the parking. This area of the downtown on East South Street, behind what we think of as Gilmore's, where the the Alamo Draft House and the parking ramp is today, has always been parking. The late 1800s, it's called Farmer's Alley for a reason. That's where you'd come with your wagon, you'd sell things, and that's where you could leave your wagon parked while you did your shopping downtown when you came into town for the day. Okay, so this was by the 1950s, the late 40s, early 50s. It was pretty much a parking area. And this was taken. I tried to get a fairly close angle, but they were in a different building here. And you can see just the edge of the Cupies right there, with its tile. But this is the parking area that was behind Gilmore's. That's where it became the Gilmore's parking ramp, the 2-level parking ramp. And we went to concerts there on the 2nd level in the summer of the 1960s, right? And this is still parking today. So this has always been parking. There really haven't been a lot of buildings on this site, except right along South Street itself. There was like a livery stable and a couple of other things, mostly things that actually in some way catered to the farmers coming into town. Now we're down on Rose Street. I'm really happy with these two pictures because our city record center could not identify where these were. They said, these are nitrate negatives. We don't know where they are. Can anybody help figure this out? And it took me a little bit of puzzling, but I figured it out. This is South Rose Street, and they were taking up the streetcar tracks. They were going to repave. The streetcar system closed down around 1932 after a strike and after prices started going up, and they wanted to go to buses because buses would be a lot more efficient. And if you look at a map of the streetcar system in 1932 and you look at a map of the bus routes in 1955, they're exactly the same. So really the flexibility, nobody ever had the imagination to change the routes, probably figuring people would get angry at them. But anyway, so this is South Rose Street, and you can just barely, it doesn't show really clearly in the distance, you can see this building, the Prang building in the far distance. So this is South Rose, so this was houses all along here. This is the house that belonged to Dr. Crane, who, as in, no, not Crane, different Crane. There were two Cranes. There was Dr. Crane, the radiologist, and Carolyn Bartlett Crane, and there was another Crane that built the Crane house. So anyway, this is this was their home, and this right now, this is a vacant lot between the Prang building on the corner of Rose and Lovell, and all the way up to Cedar. This is a vacant lot where the old police station used to be, the 1950s station. And that one lot that never had police cars in it or anything, it always had AT&T trucks in it, that was owned by the descendants of the Crane family who refused to sell it to the city because they'd torn down the house to make room for the police station. So that's the Crane house. And this is the same view today. Again, this is all empty space. Maybe it'll be something else again. I mean, that would be nice. Something useful. Now this is the First Methodist Church. This was at the corner of Lovell and South Rose Street. Of course, this is the view today. That charming, inviting, called brutalist arch. Those are actually shutters. Those are lead shutters because this was during our nuclear terror days. They wanted to be able to close off. This was all the switching equipment for southwestern Michigan. They wanted to be able to close it off if they needed to and protect everything. So those were actually shutters. They forgot about the pigeons though, which is why we have that attractive netting over all of them today. But anyway, this is the church that was there. When you get to the point where you start really looking at old pictures of Kalamazoo, the First Methodist Church, First Baptist Church spires, and then the county courthouse spires, those are your markers. You can figure out where the picture is and where it was taken and all that kind of stuff by figuring out which church you're seeing and which spires you're seeing, and that can help you figure it out. And look at here, I mean, what you've got here is this is residential. This is residential next to the church. So this would be the block where this building is, and the State Theater is back in here. This is where Dr. Pierce had her doctor's office, was right there between the State Theater and the First Methodist Church. And then she had to move when they built the State Theater in the 20s. So again, here we're talking about, if you look at this, I don't know if you can see this here, and this is the edge of Bronson, see, that wouldn't be Bronson Park, would it be? Maybe it is, a little bit of foreshortening. But what's interesting to me is you've got this little set of steps, so wherever you are there, you can go up over this little fence easily. Maybe to get into a wagon or something, or get into a carriage, I don't know. I thought the steps were really kind of just intriguing. Okay, so this is probably late 1870s. It looks like a Schuyler Baldwin picture. He was a very active photographer in Kalamazoo. He would take pictures on spec, and that's why we have so many pictures of the intersection of Rose and Michigan Avenue, because his studio was right near there. So when he was bored, he'd go out, and if there was a parade, oh, we got to take a picture of this. And so we have lots of pictures because of the fact that his studio was right there on Main Street. So this is the building. This is about the center of the library today, facing Rose. And this is the building that was the Institute of Arts, right there in that block. Absolutely, absolutely gorgeous building. Just beautiful. And that served as the first Institute of Arts. On the library website, and I found it through a link from Facebook, so I'm not sure exactly where it is. There's a short film that they made to show that they needed to have more space at the library. What they were hoping at that point in time was to get an addition put on the library. And so they have this gentleman, who really is not the name, but he says, go to the library to get a book out. And they just follow him around and they make like a little video of all the ways that his family interacts with the library and the museum and the Institute of Arts, which are all right next to each other. And so it's this wonderful, like 30-minute film without sound, where he goes in and they're very careful to show how, okay, we can get this out for you, but we have to put this under the table before we can take this out of the file, and how crowded they are because they don't have any space to do anything, but they're still serving patrons and doing a good job. It's a really wonderful little film. If you want to just search around the library website and see it, it was just and then of course they're out on the street. They're just, walking around downtown, so you get little glimpses of the downtown from that late 1930s time period. It's a lot of fun. This, of course, is our absolutely glorious old library. These are the original architect's sketches of how it was to be laid out. And then this is the way it turned out, which I think it turned out quite nicely, actually, with very few modifications. And this is pretty close to the same angle today. I didn't get quite far enough off to the corner because there's the Park Club wall. No, it is. I'm shooting from the parking lot. That's it. That's why you see that wavy wall. That only dates from the 60s, so that's not really that historic. I thought this was kind of fun because this is one of the automobiles that was actually manufactured here in Kalamazoo, the Cornelian. And here it is parked in front of the library, the same way that, of course, they will take modern cars today in the ads and they will park them in front of some fancy house, just to show it off. Well, this was one of the most beautiful buildings in town, so they parked it in front of it just to show it off. Now across the street, where now we have the Miller Canfield building, the newer building, this was the First Presbyterian Church before the fire. It filled that very close to the same footprint. It was a very large building of what the Miller Canfield building is today. It was quite a large building, quite a large church with lots of parts and pieces, much as it is today. It's quite a large building today with all the additions that have been put on over time. So this was at that corner. A little bit further down, and then this corner also, this picture is looking from from South Street, looking towards the park. So this is the park here. There was a Standard Oil station at the corner. There was the Rex Park Cafe right next to the park building, would have been right here. There's a little restaurant, and then this was the Veterans Taxi stand outside there. So this is South Rose. I love this picture of, there's our First Presbyterian Church again as one of your markers of where you are. This is the view today, and I just love the little girls just standing there. And here's the sidewalk going away in the distance, and look at the ditches to catch the rainwater. We didn't have a storm sewer system yet when this picture was taken. So this was something that was well into the future yet. So that was the best you could do for drainage. So when someone says they fell into the ditch, really there's a lot of pretty gross stuff in there. So I just love it when you can see, especially when you see kids sitting still, holding still long enough to have their picture taken in the 1870s. Now this is a picture taken in the probably in the mid to late 1870s, maybe early 1880s. Again, here, see all the fences. This is South Rose Street, and this right now is where the Comerica and the former YWCA building are today. The Consumers Building was there, the Academy of Music was there, and we're going to see those also. But this house was moved. I call this the mobile home. It originally faced Michigan Avenue, in where that parking lot is on the corner of Michigan and Rose today. That's where it was originally. When Justice Burdick built it, he kind of added the order for his lumber onto the order for the lumber for the new courthouse, so he got a really good deal. And he built what was at that time considered a mansion, and this is where it was located on West. It was originally located facing Michigan Avenue. They turned it around the corner and plopped it down right here, facing Academy pretty much. And then in 1882, it was moved to the corner of Vine and Westnedge, where it still stands today.
And they say if you get an
where it was cut in half. They moved it down the street in the middle of June, 1882, when the owner, Mr. Rainey, was on vacation up in Charlevoix, and the doctor at the corner of Rose and Vine said, "You're not going to cut my tree to get this house passed." And so it was stuck there in the middle of the street until Mr. Rainey could come down and do something about it, and the doctor stuck with it. And so in the long run, they just cut the building in half, took it around the corner, didn't cut the tree. And if you go, you can still see where they cut it. They didn't really cut it truly in half because it's not really a half mark, but definitely you can see where it is. Beautiful walnut staircase inside. It's still got a lot of its original features. I want to get that fake brick stuff off it personally. Okay, now this house belonged to Colonel Curtinius and his family. This would have been his second family. His first family was all adults almost all adults when he came home from the Civil War. And he married again when his wife passed away and had another family, and they built this wonderful house down on the west end of the park. This is the Curtinius home. These might even be some of the Curtinius children here. In 1882, in January of 1882, 4 of the 5 children died of diphtheria in 1 month. They're all buried together up at the cemetery. So this is, and then Colonel Curtinius himself died about 9 months later. I think his youngest child was born just after he passed away. He was a vigorous man. I do not know who owned this house, but for a while it was the YWCA. So this is next to the Curtinius house. This was the YWCA for a little bit of time until they built the new building in the late 1920s. So maybe for 10, 15 years this was the YWCA. So these buildings, one of them is still there. It's just kind of moved a little. This is, for those of you who remember the tornado, I thought this was a very dramatic picture. Now this is taken from Bronson Park looking towards this face of the building. This is right after the tornado, before they'd even been able to board anything or put anything up yet. This is the building that was on that site. This is the building that faces Michigan Avenue. So this is the Consumers Electricity Building. There's, on the Making of Modern Michigan collection, there is a picture, this same picture, only at night, so you can see this quite brightly lit holiday decoration, just kind of glowing in the distance. It's really nice, really nice. Now this is also what was at that site. This was the Academy of Music. It was built in 1878. In this time period, you have to take yourself back in time. This is why we say the past is a foreign country. There's no television. There's no radio. There's letters. There's books. There's live performances. Music you have to create yourself. There's just barely the beginning of recorded music right now, just barely. And usually it's a melodeon or something with little holes punched in a disc, and it's nothing like listening to live music. So traveling artists and traveling performers were very popular. And Kalamazoo had some makeshift, some nice but not quite really totally devoted places for these traveling groups to stop and to perform. And in the late 1870s, early 1880s, this is why the house was moved, so that this building could go up. So they moved the house, got it out of there. And the Academy of Music was designed by Denkmar Adler, who was a partner of Louis Sullivan and in the same architectural firm that Frank Lloyd Wright worked in later. It was an absolutely glorious building, and it stood from the late 1882 to, I believe there was a massive fire in the late 20s or early 30s that took it out. And it went through being everything from a performing venue for opera, for plays, for music of all kinds, to, in the very end, at the tail end, it was a movie theater. It was one of the movie theaters. This is what, and it's kind of a dark picture. I'd love to get the original and really play with it, see what we could bring out, but this is what the stage itself looked like. This was from 1880. There was a musical extravaganza going on. And then this is what it looked like from the front. One of the fellows who works here at the library as an intern is a Lego fanatic, and he really knows that he has built this out of Legos. It's really cool. I was going to include him in the show, but I couldn't find the pictures because I thought that'd be kind of fun to have the Lego version. He's also done the county courthouse and a couple of other buildings. But this is what we have there today. It's a large building. It's offices. I don't think it's as charming as what was there, but it's what we have, you know. Now I want you to take a look at this building, though, because we're going to see that a little bit more. This is what the whole building looked like. Just absolutely gorgeous. If you've ever been down to see the Tibbetts Opera House down in Coldwater, this is similar. Ours is bigger, but it has that same sort of treatment up here at the top and just really nice. And again, here's our awnings facing west. and facing west here, and then the street awnings. Just a beautiful theater, and this says the Academy right here. So it was a very grand place. Now this building, you can see here in these pictures, and this about in this location, this is a 6-person bike at the Celery City Bicycle Shop, and that is these three, see these 3 windows, and then there's the stairs going upstairs. So 1, 2, 3, and then these are the steps that go upstairs from the outside, and then this is the view down the alley. And then this one, which is Charles Russell's framing shop, is these 3 windows here, because you can see there's his awning, and there it is in the picture, and then again there's that center entrance that goes upstairs. Little set of doors at the very bottom, but that was how you got up to your apartment. Usually the door went directly from the street for you. That was kind of neat. I don't think that bicycle might be a little unwieldy, but it's probably the bicycling craze. We did have, for a short time, we had a banked wooden bicycle track on the corner of North and Douglas. Only lasted about 3 years, right around this time. So maybe they were headed over there to see what kind of speed they could get up on a banked track. That'd be frightening. Now, of course, the courthouse being one of the taller places in the area, that was where, of course, you went to the top of to take pictures of things. The taller the space, that's where you wanted to go with your view camera and to take pictures. So again, here, to get some perspective, there's the library there, First Presbyterian Church. This is the Curtinius house with this little tiny point on top of its belvedere. There's the Academy of Music, the bicycle shop, and then another little shop here. And this is taken looking down over the southeast spire of the courthouse, because the courthouse had 4 spires, one at each corner, and then a very large one also in the center with a statue on. The statue is in the lobby of the museum in that giant display case. So we saved that. And then so here you're talking about, this is what we now think of as the mall, Burdick, and there's a lot of details here, a lot of interesting things to see. So this is what the courthouse looked like. So when they were taking that picture, they were probably right about up here, because you can see the top of that spire there. And those roofs were metal, so they kind of glowed, they reflected in the sunlight. This is the original county courthouse, the one that Justice Burdick kind of piggybacked his order for his lumber on, because it was a wooden building, and when they wanted to build this one, they moved this one about 4 blocks north, and it was used for other purposes at that point. The cannon that we think has always been in the southeast corner of Bronson Park actually was originally on the courthouse lawn, and it's really not from the Civil War. So it was put up by the Orcutt Post of the GAR, but it was never actually active in the Civil War. The cannon itself dates from after that time. But that's life. Anyway, so this is the courthouse, and again, this is probably the Michigan Avenue face, because these are the buildings behind it. This is the Academy of Music and the other buildings that are there. So this is probably the Michigan Avenue face, because you could get further away and get a nice long shot of it. Rosen, Michigan, this is what it looked like way long. This is today, or yesterday, whenever it was I took this picture. But then this is, just to get an idea of how different things were here, okay? There's their Peninsula building again that has the giant billboard on today. So this is definitely pre-1880, because starting in the 1880s was when there was pretty much a sign on top of that building all the time, from that time to the present. So this is what the streets look like. Again, here we have the deep gutters. That's where everything drained. Just here you're starting to get some curbs. This is a little bit later, and they've put down some plank sidewalks. There are plank sidewalks along here. Plank doesn't last real long when you've got things rotting on the surface. Yeah?
Was there some sort of standard for street width? Because I'm just amazed at
how wide this is.
how wide they were and how lucky we all are that they made those streets as wide as they did.
I don't think there was. I think it just was what people wanted, and they used the same way that they said our churches should be close together, our institutes of higher learning should be on hilltops, because that's how much we revere education. Streets were wider where they knew it was going to be a main street. They just made it wider. Now the very, very first few were probably a little closer together than that, but as those burned, keep in mind that almost every single downtown anywhere in the Midwest, probably anywhere in the country, hit a time between the 1860s and the 1890s where the whole downtown burned down or threatened to. Okay, because things were made of wood, you know, you're going to have a fire, it's going to spread to the other buildings, and then they say, okay, from now on we're going to build with brick downtown. And so everything got rebuilt. The Chicago fire, the Holland fire, Saginaw fire, you know, all the Peshtigo fire, all these different places that had fires. Kalamazoo was like that. So when you lost those buildings, you said, okay, wait a minute, here's a golden opportunity. Let's make the road just a little bit wider so there's more room. And I don't know whether they were envisioning things like streetcars. They might have been thinking of that a little bit, that you need more space if you had streetcars coming up and down the road as well. But most towns would make their roads a little bit wider. So I don't think there was a standard. We really didn't have highway standards until well into the 20s and 30s at the very earliest about how wide a street needed to be and zoning and all that kind of stuff. It just didn't come into play. Just what do you want it to look like? You want it to look grand and impressive. So you sometimes have these little tiny towns that have maybe 5 buildings. But boy, their main street is nice and wide, you know. I love this one because this picture is actually 1920. When you're seeing most everybody else is automobiles here, but here's this guy with his cart and horse, man. He's still going strong. And we have the brick streets. This is the corner, the new theater's there. This is the corner where the Radisson is today. This is that same corner. There's a couple of little carts here. These are like vending carts. What think of today as we think about our food trucks, you know, same kind of idea. They'd just be vending right on the street. So always been heavy traffic. And again, one of the things that you can see here when you look at some of these pictures, you can say, okay, we've got storm sewers now. You don't need a manhole cover if you don't have sewers. So obviously we're advancing in the world. Kalamazoo was one of the cities in Michigan, one of the few cities that said, you know, I think we should have separate sanitary and street sewers. Storm sewers, and that's really been a good thing because we've never really had that problem that Grand Rapids and other cities who have combined systems have with when you have really, really, really heavy rains getting all sorts of things backing up that you don't really want because it's a combined system. So when they did it here in Kalamazoo, they did it the right way from the very beginning. So this is looking straight due north on Rose Street. Again, you see these streetcar, look at these streetcar tracks. We are headed north. This is, and those went to, a lot of them went to the factories. The north side was mostly, it was celery farmers, it was a lot of Dutch folks lived over there. The African American community that we think of today as being very heavily on the north side was actually closer down to the river at that time period. They were not over the whole north side. So this was, and these went out to a lot of the factories and the farms that were out in that direction and connected people that lived in those neighborhoods to the paper mills and the other factories that were other places in the city. The streetcar system was very heavily used. One of the single biggest problems they had before the First World War was overcrowding on the streetcars because they were very used. Once automobiles came in, everybody wanted one. Now this shop was in a building that was moved from elsewhere on Main Street. I'm not sure exactly where, according to the title I found, but it was located just about here for a long time. And then something else came and got rid of it. This is a view from I don't think it's the Lawrence Chapin building, but this is supposed to be the backs of buildings that face Rose Street right here. And I'm thinking it might be connected with this, Sawmills Woodworking Equipment. This might have been their yard outside. Although it looks like a livery stable too, so I'm not sure. This one is kind of a tricky one. I may need more information and some old maps to figure this one out. This is 1984, the view up North Rose. So this is obviously long before this went in. This part of the Arcadia Creek development went in the late 80s, early 90s, the KVCC college downtown. And this was the alley. See, it's all paved with brick that looked all the way up to Burdick Street there. So this is the Rose, the Charstake. All these are now gone. I believe over here, just a little way, there's the museum, and then there's the Salvation Army building. And that's one of the old ones. And then this one was taken from probably the top of the Lawrence Chapin building. This is looking towards the Comerica building in the rain. We can see it's a shiny night. That's more recent. This building, originally the Lawrence Chapin Iron Works building, they made iron. Kalamazoo was a place where there was a lot of bog iron, iron that could be taken right out of the ground, could be smelted, could be made into a lot of different products. And the Lawrence Chapin building, that's what they did. So this was industrial as well as office right in the middle of downtown. This whole part of the downtown was really very heavily industrial. If you look at the old Sanborn fire insurance maps downstairs that they have in the local history room, you will see that it says, congested, industrial, because that's what it was. Everybody wanted to be in the downtown. Now with zoning, we tend to try to push industrial out to a place where it's not going to be in the middle of where everyone lives. Back in the day, it was right in the middle of downtown because that's where people wanted to be. So this says interurban station. It was originally the Lord's Chapin Iron Works. It also became the interurban station, and you can see the car right here pulling in. And here they are pulling in on next to the building. Earlier, the interurban station, I think it was earlier or later, was on Portage Street, where the interurban building is, right across from the Alamo Draft House now. There's that, you see that big arch, and it sets way back. That was the interurban. That was where they stopped. And I'm not sure which one was which, whether that one was first or later. I think this was probably the later one because of the fact that there's more cars and because the Masonic Temple dates from the 1920s. So this kind of helps us to date this, this entire area. This is the Todd building, which was the A.M. Todd. He did spices. And then the Masonic Temple, Kalamazoo Laundry Company building. This one is still there. Obviously, that one is still there. These others are all gone. Yeah?
Now what about the creek? Where is Arcadia?
The Arcadia Creek pretty much is underground. It's under there. It is, absolutely. It did not come above ground until the Arcadia Creek project in the early 90s. So this is pretty much the same view today as this area. Okay, and this is where the interurban cars were, and they would pull in, and then they'd pull back out again to go on the next stage. They didn't, and the same thing they did on Portage. They didn't pull in and pull through. They pulled in and then they pulled back out again and went on the next part of their trip. That's how my family ended up here in Kalamazoo, because my grandmother said to the mafia when Prohibition came in, no, you go right ahead and hide all the liquor you want. They lived in Detroit. Hide all the liquor you want in the flour bins at the bakery I'm working at, or in our apartment, because you said don't lock the doors because we want to be able to come get it anytime. Absolutely fine. You go right ahead and do that, because I won't be here. And she took her babies and she got on the interurban and she came to Kalamazoo, where she knew there were other people from her village in Sicily. So that's it. I'm just not going to be here. And my grandfather followed a couple of years later.
Interurban, it was a train on tracks? I can't
Oh yes,
tell.
Absolutely. It was pretty much what we think of today as buses, but you could usually connect up with street railways, streetcars in a lot of cities. You could almost go coast to coast on the interurbans. Definitely, you could go all over Michigan on the interurbans. They went between the cities because remember, this is pre-highways. This is 1900 to about 1925, 1935. There weren't highways yet. There weren't even really very good roads.